Thank you so much for keeping it Citizen Television. As we kickstart our conversation right now, we are talking about the university funding headache. And already in studio, I have a panel of three gentlemen as we expect, of course, the arrival of FCPA Charles Ringera, the CEO of HELB. But of course, already with us, just to run you through, I'm hosting a panel of three gentlemen. Of course, on my far right, once again, in case you're just joining us, Geoffrey Monari, CEO, Universities Fund, who is at the center there. And of course, we also have with us Ngetich Michael Soi, UNSA, Head of Public Service. This is the University of Nairobi Students Association, and Professor Romanus Odhiambo, who is the Vice Chancellor, Meru University of Science and Technology. Should I go on, Prof?
Thank you.
He knows why. Karibu sana. And thank you for creating time for us. Of course, we are having this conversation at a time when the country is at a very pivotal juncture of just transitioning into, a funding model that basically would, the vision was it would bridge the gap of inequality in access to education when it comes to institution of higher learning. That is actually what we all were envisioning to achieve when it comes to this change of strategy with regards to how we are funding universities. I'll begin with you, Mr. Monari, just to talk to us about the significance of this moment for the country and why we should look at this transition with deeper lenses.
Thank you very much, Safin, and I'm glad to be here this morning. This transition is very important for our country because, just to take you back, there have been various transitions over the years due to the various changing environments in the education sector. The loaning or the funding sector in Kenya started in 1952. When Kenyans were being given a loan to be able to go to universities outside this country. And at that point, Kenyans used to leave their title deeds with the government so that they could be able to be facilitated to go outside the country for higher education. And knowing the importance of higher education, many families left their title deeds with the government. And this transitioned to 1974-75, when the loaning scheme was introduced in Kenya after the University of Nairobi was established from the Royal Tech College. And the first cohort who got loans were given in 1974. So that was the second cycle. Then we moved to the third cycle, that was in 1989-1990, when the pay-as-you-earn was introduced in this country, when students were now expected. Between 1974 and 1990, the students were being given loans. Government was taking care of all the other costs. In 1990, the pay-as-you-earn was introduced, where this was a cost-sharing model, where students were expected to pay for their meals, and they were also the loans continued to be given to them. And then we moved to the fourth cycle, that is the year 2015-16, when the differentiated unit cost was then introduced in this country, where government was to give 80% of the cost of the program and 20% was expected from either the household or they get a loan from HELB. Now we are in the fifth cycle. We are like in the fifth generation of this, where we have moved from equality funding to equity funding, where we are funding based on the level of need. This new funding model is student-centered. And you'll notice that funding and even university keeps on evolving, and that is why it is important for our country to ensure that we keep on evolving and ensuring that we are abreast with the changes in the world. Thank you.
All right. Actually, I also understand it's no longer called the new funding model. It has changed to now the student-centered, model.
Yes, funding model.
Funding model.
Yes.
All right. But then again, Prof, he has taken us through the depth of where all this began. Five cycles?
Yes, 5 cycles.
Yeah. Do you get a sense of us as a country getting it when it comes to really what university, or let me just say higher institution funding is all about, or we are looking at a 6th cycle in the near future?
Thank you very much, Madam. I think universities in Kenya for the last 10 10, 15 years have gone through a lot of challenges. And as my friend Monari has talked about how we have progressed, we reached a level where the fourth circle, where the government was paying 80%, and then the students supposed to pay 20% using the DUC. Now the 20% started almost 2015, which that time was about 16,000. And even a person like me who did my last degree around 1989, immediately after that, that 16,000 people started paying 8,000. And the government has always been thought to be paying 80%. So if the fees that a student is paying is 100, then they were supposed to be paying 80, and then the student is supposed to be paying 20, but the student has always been paying 16,000. So the problem that has been with that is that because of what is happening in our country, you know, we know it. I mean, the money is never enough. We have been only be getting up to the latest about 48 instead of 80. And that has brought a problem. And so the new government, about 2 years ago, introduced the latest stage, which is now taking into consideration the needs of a student. Is now becoming more student focused.
All right.
And that is what now brings the changes that we are talking about right now.
Pardon me for cutting you short,
yes,
but I'm coming back to you shortly. Just also to allow you to also weigh in. As the voice of the students themselves, this transition from our understanding is really focusing on the needs of the student. But as a representation of the voice of the student, what is this need looking like? When we are saying a student-centered model of funding, from a student's perspective, how should it look like?
Right from the start, I would definitely say to the cameras and to the people watching this, that is a lie. It's not student-based. In the introduction of this student-centered model, the introduction bit of it, which I received from the Ministry of Education, from the PS herself, Dr. Beatrice Nyangala, it says that this model was unveiled on May 3rd, 2023 to address challenges faced by public universities and technical and vocational education institutions as a result of massive enrollment and inadequate funding. So there isn't anything which Monari is telling us and Prof concerning student-centeredness in this model. So it's bound to address the debt crisis that our universities are facing to a tune, I think, of around 60 billion now, University of Nairobi being the leading with 20 billion. So it is in student-centered. Why am I saying so? Take the case of Band 1. Professor has just informed us that in the previous model, DUC, the government was supposed to pay 80%, and then the students are supposed to pay 20%. But in this model, whereby they are telling you they will be giving you a scholarship of 70%, then 25% loan, then 5% household, this simply tells us that at the end of this, when you're finishing your program, you would have financed by yourself 30% of the cost, and the government has now reduced the funding that was given to the students from 80% to 70%, which they are hiding it under the scholarship bit of it. And as Prof has said, the latest capitation that they received was 48%. What confidence do we have that even after we embrace this funding model, they would hike to give the 70% scholarship that they are talking to us about? So it's not student-centered, it's aimed to address the financial crisis that is there in funding of higher learning institutions. Yeah. And that should be clear.
All right. And that's why we're having this conversation actually, yes. Just to clear all those gray areas and concerns that have been raised with even regards to how the instrument that is being employed in deciding the level of need for the students is effective, to what extent. But then again, I want you both to respond to the key concerns that he has raised. First of all, let me start with you, Prof, because we've cut you short.
You are very right in the sense that universities have been having a serious financial problems. And there had to be a way in which we get that money to come to the university. So one way of doing it, one way of doing it,
one way of shifting from the aspect of student-centeredness. No, it's a scheme to take care of the public universities. So let us not paint it gray and black and green and say we are sorting out the funding issues of the university, as Prof has said.
Right. So why the student comes in is that when Ngetich comes from a high school, there was that level of the socio-economic status, and there you find somebody's going to a school where he pays 70,000, the others pay 50,000 and all the rest. So the thing is now, when they are coming to the university, you need to look at Ngetich status, so that the fees that you are going to tell Ngetich to pay in the university is based on his level of socio-economic status. And that's how the neediness, the measurement of the neediness of Ngetich comes about. And so if Ngetich is a very vulnerable student, as most Kenyan students are, that's how now Ngetich, the government will facilitate him to pay around 95%, and he'll only pay 5%. And if it's slightly lower, then the government will facilitate him to pay 90%, and he pay 10%. And if it's slightly better, the government will facilitate him to pay 80%, and the government paying 20%, and just like that up to 60%.
Yeah. All right. The concern that he has raised, if I got his argument correctly, he cited, for instance, the band 1 that touches on the most vulnerable, and government is going to shoulder like 95% of this cost. But if you break it down, 70% is for scholarship, but again, you're left with the burden of paying 25% and 5% household contribution, because the 25% is loans, and the household contribution 5%, this comes from the pocket of the household. So this makes 30%. And leaves the 70% to the government. So going back to the previous dispensation, the cycle 4, where government was taking care of 80%, and the student and their family were left to take care of 20%, does that mathematics add up?
Yes, it does add up. Let me respond to that in 2 ways. Number one, this is a student-centered model because we are ensuring that the quality of the education in our universities is maintained or even enhanced, because we realized over the period of time that we introduced the DUC, as Prof has said, the funding reduced from the 80% to 48%. In fact, our projection showed that if we continued with that same trend, by the year 2027-28, we would be at 21% funding of the DUC. Therefore, why it is, and we continue saying it is a student-centered model, the most important thing is that we want the Kenyan student to come out with a quality of education that is expected from a university. We are talking about a university which comes from the word universal. We are preparing Kenyans to be the human capital from Kenyan students ready for the world market. We don't want to be local, and that is why we must insist that the full cost of the program should be paid. That is number one, and that is how we look at it. Number two, when it comes to the funding, Prof here talked about 16%. He and I and the students know. Ngetich, how much are you paying right now? Is it 16%?
It is not 16,000.
How much are you paying?
Initially, before it was 28,000. Before it was hiked for University of Nairobi to 59. So currently, students are paying 59,000.
So it's paying 59,000. So you can see quietly, because of the hardship the universities were facing, the fees and other costs were increased. He's talking about 59. There are universities that were charging 70. That is what we were trying to cap. If you look at the actual cost of the program, then you will realize the students are paying less. What is happening is that we have deferred that cost and moved it to the loan because of the current economic situation. So that the students pay less. Students are paying, their students paying up to 12,000 per year. But they will be able to pay that when they stop being students and they start working, because they will not be students forever.
Okay, let me weigh in again further on that.
All right.
They have said they are giving me a scholarship of 70%, which I treat it as a grant from the government. Then 25% will be a loan. So currently I receive a loan of 50,000 from HELB, which I'm supposed to pay. So cumulatively to be around 300,000. Let us make this case scenario of this person who is in band 1 the most vulnerable. So he will be paying the loan accumulated after the 6 years of doing medicine, a total of 918,000 Kenya shillings. That is on the terms of the loan. Before you add the upkeep that they are being given from HELB, that is 60,000, it will come to 360. So around 1.2 something million. And before, I was applying the other time a trainee program for a certain company. They tell you you should have clearance from HELB. So how am I supposed to get that job, yet a requirement is to have a clearance from HELB for me to start repaying 1.2 million? And we know the unemployment rates in our country. So this is basically trying to cover up the scheme here and tell us we are sorting out the issues, yet there is nothing being sorted out. It's like they are shifting the burden from the government to the students.
I want something to come out very clear. And Prof, just allow me, also to give you a chance to weigh in on this, yeah? If my understanding is correct, the government would shoulder 80% and leave 20% to the populace to shoulder. Now, if you look at even the breakdown of all the other bands, you get that the loan and the household contribution ranges between 30 to 40 something percent. How is that an advantage on the part of the student? How is that a weight that has been lifted off their shoulder? That is something that I guess many people would want to know.
I think the point is that fees have to be paid so that Ngetich gets 100% quality education. And you have just said with my friend Monari here that has not been the case. Instead of doing the 80, the government has only been doing 48. So as a government, we have come up in the last 2 years. How are we going to pay this 100%? We have to check, number one, the parent, that is the sponsor of Ngetich who is here, must do something. That's the household. Then we also continue with what has been happening in the past. The scholarship or the bursary have to be paid. That the government paying. Ngetich is not going to pay for it. But then there's still a gap. You remember 80 to 48, that is around 32. Somebody has to be. And we are pleading with the Kenyan students, including my friend Ngetich here, that it's better for him to get that loan now so that he gets his education than in future. And please be confident, we are going to have jobs. You get the job.
Are we trying to say currently?
No.
Let me finish.
Ngetich, you're going to have to allow Prof to also make his thoughts.
It's not good for Ngetich to get a quarter base or half base education. It's good for him to get 100%. That will allow him to be a global graduate, that he can work in Kenya, he can work anywhere, the whole world. And that's why we are pleading that for the government really to give Ngetich some enhanced payment in form of loan so that in future also his children and other people who are vulnerable should actually access that. I think the intention, my son Ngetich, is very good. That it is not good for you to get a quarter-based or a half-baked education, but it's good for you to get education that will allow you to be a global citizen. You can work in Kenya, you can work in East Africa, you can work in Africa, you can work in the whole world. This is the intention. But that will have to come with a course which the government is giving you, that they loan you, and then later on you pay back so that other poor Kenyans can also access the education.
Just so it's clear, are you having a problem with the loan? Do you have a problem with the loan?
Before I have a problem with the loan, he's saying that this is meant to ensure that I get full education that is to the standards of the world. I can work anywhere. Great. So the question that I would like to pitch now is, with the old model that we've been using, does it mean our universities have been providing half-baked education? Is that what we are trying to imply, that it has been providing this manner that we want to resolve? I want Prof to answer to that. And then the funding has been minimal in the previous years, but universities have been borrowing, and that is why we are in debts. So it isn't like a whole whereby it wasn't given. Universities have been borrowing from creditors around. That's why they are crumbling in debt. That's why they haven't done remittances to KRA and the various statutory bodies. So we cannot say there hasn't been money. We are working on the negative. That is why I'm arguing that this model is trying to seal a hole somewhere from further digging further, but not helping the students.
But do you have a problem with it?
I have a problem because...
And the household contributions.
What
is your problem with that?
I have a problem because I will have to pay 1.2 million.
But that has been the case over...
It hasn't been the case. Because for myself, under DUC, what I owe HELB right now is around 300,000, including now some interest. It will span to around 350. But in this new funding model, there will be now an added cost of this 25%, which I'm given as a loan.
Let me weigh in on this. I think Ngetich is bringing out issues, but he's forgetting that the cost of living keeps on changing. The first people, and I gave a chronology of events, the first people who were given these loans in the 70s were given loans every year of 1,000 shillings. By the end of the program, they were paying 6,000. When you move over the years, now Ngetich has reached 300,000. The cost of any program keeps on increasing. By the time the current beneficiaries of this loaning scheme will be able to finish, even the amount of money he's talking about, because of the cost of living and salaries will go up, will also be affordable to these students. We have to accept that the cost of living is also changing. Number two, the current funding that he is getting from the Higher Education Loans Board, about 40% of that comes from the old beneficiaries, which means that we will not be able to fund the current students if those the earlier students were not repaying their loans. And that is the sustainable funding model that we are creating, so that the current generation can be able to fund future generation. There is no country that is able to grow without supporting each other. We are creating a sustainable revolving fund for the future generation. All
right. Monari, thank you for saying that, because when we come back from this break, we have to pay some bills. We also look at the ability of, Kenyans to repay, because it's one thing to complete your education. It's totally another to get a job and to be able to pay back so that somebody else can be able to benefit from that. We are going to be having that conversation in just a bit. Allow us to take a very short break. We are back with much more.